everyone. Welcome back to Carrie's Corner, or welcome if this is your first day. We're in week 3, and we are continuing our read of The Wind in the Willows by Kenneth Grahame, illustrated by Eric Kincaid. And we are starting in the middle of a chapter, Mr. Toad. And Toad is feeling like he's very sick because he wants to get something. You'll find out what. "I fear, dear friend," said Toad with a sad smile, "that talk can do little in a case like this, or doctors either, for that matter. Still, one must grasp at the slightest straw. And by the way, while you are about it, I hate to give you more trouble, but I happen to remember that you will pass the door. Would you mind at the same time asking the lawyer to step up? It would be a convenience to me, and there are moments, perhaps I should say there is a moment, when one must face disagreeable tasks at whatever cost to exhausted nature." "A lawyer? Oh, he must be really bad," the worried rat said to himself as he hurried from the room, not forgetting, however, to lock the door carefully behind him. Outside, he stopped to consider. The other two were far away, and he had no one to consult. "It's best to be on the safe side," he said. "I've known Toad fancy himself frightfully bad before, without the slightest reason, but I've never heard him ask for a lawyer. If there's nothing really the matter, the doctor will tell him he's an old fool and cheer him up. It won't take very long." So he ran off to the village and on his errand of mercy. The Toad, who had hopped lightly out of bed as soon as he heard the key turned in the lock, watched him eagerly from the window till he disappeared down the drive. Then, laughing heartily, he dressed as quickly as possible in the smartest suit he could lay hands on at the moment, filled his pockets with cash, which he took from a small drawer in the dressing table, and next, knotting the sheets from his bed together and tying one end round the central bar of the window, he scrambled out, slid lightly to the ground, and, taking the opposite direction to the rat, marched off light-heartedly, whistling a merry tune. It was a gloomy lunch for Rat when the Badger and the Mole at length returned, and he had to face them at table with his rather weak story. The Badger's biting, not to say brutal remarks, may be imagined, but it was painful to the Rat that even the Mole, though he took his friend's side as far as possible, could not help saying, "You've been a bit of a duffer this time, Ratty. Toad, too, of all animals." "He did it awfully well," said the Rat. And here's the pictures of all of what we just read. "How did you awfully well?" replied the Badger hotly. "However, talking won't mend matters. He's got clear away for the time, that's certain, and the worst of it is, he'll be so conceited with what he'll think is his cleverness that he may do anything. One comfort is, we're free now, and we needn't waste any more of our precious time doing sentry duty. But we'd better continue to sleep at Toad Hall for a while longer. Toad may be brought back at any moment on a stretcher or between two policemen." So spoke the Badger, not knowing what the future held in store, or how much water was to run under bridges before Toad should sit at ease again in his ancestral hall. Meanwhile, Toad was walking briskly down the high road some miles from home. At first he had taken bypaths and crossed many fields, and changed his course several times in case of pursuit, but now, feeling by this time safe from recapture, and the sun smiling brightly on him, he almost danced along the road. "Smart piece of work, that," he remarked to himself, chuckling. "Brain against brutal force, and brain came out on top, as it's bound to do. Poor old Ratty, my, won't he catch it when the Badger gets back? A worthy fellow, Ratty, with many good qualities, but very little intelligence and absolutely no education. I must take him in hand some day and see if I can make something of him." Filled full of conceited thoughts such as these, he strode along, his head in the air, till he reached a little town where the sign of the Red Lion, swinging across the road halfway down the main street, reminded him that he had not had breakfast that day and that he was very hungry after his long walk. He marched into the inn, ordered the best lunch that could be provided at so short a notice, and sat down to eat it in the coffee room. He was about halfway through his meal when an only too familiar sound approaching down the street made him start and fall trembling all over. The poop-poop drew nearer and nearer. The car could be heard to turn into the inn yard and come to a stop, and Toad had to hold on to the leg of the table to hide his feelings. Presently the party entered the coffee room, hungry and talkative. Toad listened eagerly, all ears for a time. At last he could stand it no longer. He slipped out of the room quietly, paid his bill at the bar, and as soon as he got outside, sauntered round quietly to the inn yard. "There can't be any harm," he said to himself, "in my only just looking at it." The car stood in the middle of the yard, quite unattended, the stable helps being all at their dinner. Toad walked slowly round it, inspecting, criticizing, thinking deeply. "I wonder," he said to himself presently, "I wonder if this sort of car starts easily." Next moment, hardly knowing how it came about, he found he had hold of the handle and was turning it. As the familiar sound broke forth, the old passion came back and completely mastered Toad, the body and soul. As if in a dream, he found himself somehow seated in the driver's seat. And as if in a dream, he pulled the lever and swung the car round the yard and out through the archway, and as if in a dream, all sense of right and wrong seemed temporarily suspended. He increased his pace as the car leapt forth on the high road through the open country. He only knew that he was Toad once more. Toad at his best and highest. Toad the terror, the lord of the lone trail, before whom all must give way. The miles were eaten up under him as he sped he knew not where, living his hour, not caring what might happen to him. "To my mind," observed the chairman of the bench of magistrates cheerfully, "the only difficulty that presents itself with this otherwise very clear case is, how can we possibly make it sufficiently hot for the incorrigible rogue and hardened ruffian whom we see cowering in the dock before us? Let me see. He's been found guilty on the clearest evidence, first of stealing a valuable motor car, secondly of driving to the public danger, and thirdly of gross impertinence to the police. Mr. Clerk, will you tell us, please, what is the very stiffest penalty we can impose for each of these offences, without, of course, giving the prisoner the benefit of any doubt, because there isn't any?" That's the judge, and he is not happy. I think Toad's kind of in trouble. The clerk scratched his nose with his pen. "Some people would consider," he observed, "that stealing the motor car was the worst offence, and so it is. But cheating the police undoubtedly carries the severest penalty, and so it ought. Supposing you were to say 12 months for the theft, which is mild, 3 years for the furious driving, which is lenient, and 15 years for the cheek, which was pretty bad sort of cheek, which means stealing. Judging by what we've heard from the witness box, even if you only believe 1/10 of what you've heard, and I never believe more myself, those figures, if added together correctly, tot up to 19 years. "First rate," said the chairman. "So you would better make it around 20 years and be on the safe side," ended the clerk. "An excellent suggestion," said the chairman approvingly. "Prisoner, pull yourself together and try and stand up straight. It's going to be 20 years for you this time, and mind, if you appear before us again upon any charge whatever, we shall have to deal with you very seriously." Then the brutal minions of the law fell upon the hapless Toad, loaded him with chains, and dragged him from the courthouse, shrieking, praying, protesting, across the marketplace where the playful crowd assailed him with jeers, carrots, and a popular catchword, past hooting schoolchildren, their innocent faces lit up with the pleasure they ever derived from the sight of a gentleman in difficulties, across the hollow-sounding drawbridge, below the spiky portcullis, under the frowning archway of the grim old castle, whose ancient towers soared high overhead, past guard-rooms full of grinning soldiers off duty, past sentries who coughed in horrid, sarcastic way, up time-worn winding stairs, across courtyards where mastiffs strained at their leash and pawed the air to get at him, past ancient warders, their halberds leant against the wall, dozing over a pasty and a flagon of brown ale, on and on, past the rack chamber and the thumbscrew room, past the turning that led to the private scaffold, till they reached the door of the grimmest dungeon that lay in the heart of the innermost keep. There at last they paused, where an ancient jailer sat fingering a bunch of mighty keys. So there's a great picture of the courtroom. This Toad is sentenced to 20 years. Bodkin, said the sergeant of police, taking off his helmet and wiping his forehead. Get up, old loon, and take over from us this vile toad, a criminal of deepest guilt and matchless artfulness and resource. Watch and guard him with all your skill, and mark well, grey-beard, should anything untoward befall, your whole head shall answer for his. The jailer nodded grimly, laying his withered hand on the shoulder of the miserable toad. The rusty key creaked in the lock, the great door clanged behind them, and Toad was a helpless prisoner in the remotest dungeon of the best guarded keep of the stoutest castle in all the length and breadth of merry England. We're going to just start chapter 7. Here's what it looks like. Toad does not look happy. And we'll continue it tomorrow. Chapter 7, Toad's Adventures. When Toad found himself locked away in a damp and evil-smelling dungeon, and knew that all the grim darkness of a medieval fortress lay between him and the outer world of sunshine and high roads where he had lately been so happy, he flung himself at full length on the floor and shed bitter tears and abandoned himself to dark despair. This is the end of everything, he said. At least it is the end of the career of Toad, which is the same thing. The popular and handsome Toad, the rich and hospitable Toad, the Toad so free and careless and debonair. How can I hope to be ever set at large again, he said, who have been imprisoned so justly for stealing so handsome a motor car in such an audacious manner, and for such lurid and imaginative cheek bestowed upon such a number of fat, red-faced policemen. Here his sobs choked him. Stupid animal that I was, he said. Now I must languish in this dungeon, till people who were proud to say they knew me have forgotten the very name of Toad. Oh, wise old badger, he said. Oh, clever, intelligent rat and sensible mole. What sound judgments, what a knowledge of men and matters you possess. Oh, unhappy and broken, forsaken Toad. With lamentations such as these, he passed his days and nights for several weeks, refusing his meals or light refreshments. Though the grim and ancient jailer, knowing that Toad's pockets were well lined, frequently pointed out that many comforts, and indeed luxuries, could by arrangement be sent in at a price from outside. Now the jailer had a pleasant and good-hearted daughter who assisted her father in the lighter duties of his post. She was particularly fond of animals, and besides her canary, she kept several piebald mice and a restless squirrel. This kind-hearted girl, pitying the misery of Toad, said to her father one day, "Father, I can't bear to see that poor beast so unhappy and getting so thin. You let me have the managing of him. You know how fond of animals I am. I'll make him eat from my hand and sit up and do all sorts of things." And that's where we're going to stop today, so stay tuned tomorrow. Here's a glance of the daughter of the jailer. And let's see how Toad and she get along. So have a great rest of your day. Hope you get your homework done and you have some fun and maybe do some more reading. And we'll see you tomorrow. Bye. Bye.